All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking a little bit of time to spend with us today. My name's Todd Waskelis. I'm with AT&T, and I'm in the Cybersecurity Solutions Group. We've got a great panel of distinguished guests here, left to right, with Karthik, John, and Aman. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So I guess, John, let's start off with you. As the coiner and founder of Zero Trust, why don't you tell us what that means and why it's the future for security?
So Zero Trust is a security strategy primarily, right, or a model, and it identified that the fundamental problem that we have in cybersecurity today is this broken trust model where we have trusted and untrusted networks, where we've taken this human emotion and we've injected into a digital system. And it turns out when you actually look at that, you find out that trust is actually a vulnerability. And not only is it a vulnerability that must be mitigated like any other vulnerability that you have in hardware or software, but it's the world's most dangerous vulnerability because it's the only vulnerability that's its own exploit. Because the only entity that gets any value from trust in a digital system are the malicious actors who exploit it. And every single data breach is an exploitation of that broken trust model, and most cybersecurity incidents are as well. So,
tell us from the AT&T perspective how we're looking at the Zero Trust model and how that applies to the edgeless enterprise.
Sure. When we talk about edgeless enterprise, there's a slight subtle difference between Zero Trust and edgeless enterprise, right? Because the edge is kind of disappearing, right? The border is gone, its perimeter is gone. So putting all the controls at the doorstep or at the gates is kind of, becoming almost obsolete, right? Or it's becoming ineffective, right? So from an AT&T's perspective, what we look at it is, now it doesn't matter where the user is, where the asset is, and what the transaction or the access that they're trying to do, right? How do I get to a point of assessing the level of risk and then applying the level of controls and the enforcements that I need to have, right? So kind of, when we think about edgeless enterprise, don't count on one or two or three of those controls that you have in place, rather use them as additional weapons in your defense.
When an organization looks to move to this sort of transformation inside, what are some of the barriers that we come across? John, what have you seen from your perspective with organizations hitting barriers, moving to the Zero Trust model or this edgeless enterprise?
The biggest barrier, the only barrier, is cultural. That's not the way we've always done it, right? Yeah. That's the biggest objection that I have, and so that's true. That's not the way we've always done it, but the way we've done it for the past 20 years, 30 years has failed. And the reason is because the networks that we have today were designed in the 80s and 90s, last century, right? So they're old, but they were designed before there were threats. So of course we don't understand that. So one of the key principles of Zero Trust, you said the perimeter is gone, and I would argue that the perimeter is not gone. The perimeter is micro. When I'm doing this work, I'm creating micro perimeters around a protect surface, right? The data, the assets, the application, or the services that we need to protect. Once I understand that, then I don't care about anything else. If you know what you're supposed to protect, you don't have to worry about all the other things that are going on. IoT, not a problem, because you have very limited packets that have to transit a microperimeter. And so when you finally get that and understand how Zero Trust can enable that, because Zero Trust is the only thing that's both strategically resonant to the highest levels of any organization. I've sat down with members of Congress and talked about it, right? I've sat down with CEOs and board members. They don't understand the technologies behind what we're doing. You can't talk to them about spanning tree. You can't even talk to them about change control processes, right? But you can't talk to them about Zero Trust and these bigger ideas, but it's also tactically implementable. And it's implementable because we can find the stuff that we need to protect. And once we know that, then we don't have data breaches. And so I talk a lot about the strategic aspects and how the grand strategy of all cybersecurity must be to stop data breaches. If we can't do that, then we failed as an industry.
Karthik, as AT&T goes down this journey of virtualization of our network functions and the things that we're doing, how does that align with what your group is doing in terms of the edgeless enterprise? How are you working with the networking group in that space, and what kind of conflicts do you run into, if any, and have you any challenges in that sort of integration?
Yeah, I mean, as we move into 5G and the real-time or near real-time computing capabilities, those are definitely big ingredients and big support element as we kind of start to roll this out, right? So what we're talking about is internal AT&T as an enterprise and how we move that into this edgeless world, right? So the idea here is not to pre-provision all the rules, but the rules can be provisioned on the fly, right? So we kind of look at our various capabilities, and we have pilot sites from an AT&T Edge Cloud, AEC we call them, right? And then kind of put those compute nodes and do those brains behind how we calculate these risks and how we need to orchestrate security capabilities by instantiating the virtual network functions for security virtual network functions, because we're trying to virtualize almost like every single security function,
right,
and then only use them as needed and where needed.
Okay, good, good. Aman, your organization, as you go down this journey, what type of conflicts or challenges have you run into, and any advice to the audience on addressing them?
So there are two approaches that we are taking, and not just for this, but overall from a security program, and obviously Zero Trust will play a big role in this. One is having a very comprehensive strategy. So starting at the top, we came up with a model that we use, we call it a BICD framework. It brings in 4 different pillars: business priorities, industry benchmarking, compliance requirements, and threat modeling. And all those 4 create a very clear picture for us on what the priorities are for the bank. Now, with that said, I think the simplest way of doing it is the 4th one, the threat modeling that I talk about. Get a red team, let them go after your network. Share the results, you'll get tremendous support. I think it works every time. And it's not because we're trying to scare someone, but we want those facts to be out for people to realize what's the cost of not doing something. I don't think everyone realizes that, even in this day and age. And to some extent, it's unfortunate that people are getting a bit sanitized to seeing all these breaches in news all the time and saying, okay, this is way of life. But trust me, it hurts the most when it happens to you.
I'd like to ask the panel, how do we move from traditional architecture of perimeter and some level of micro-segmentation and ACLs and lots of tunnels to no tunnels, no perimeter?
How do you move from our traditional network environment of one big moat castle with a whole bunch of holes in it to rings around things,
yeah,
right?
Where do we start? So no tunnels, no perimeter.
You start with the data or the asset or the application that you understand the most, so that you can win, and then you build out from there. But you start at the inside, you design that network from the inside out.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the other ways to look at it, if an application, or, tactically speaking, is the application is already exposed to the internet, right? Obviously, exposed to the public network, it's already out there, right? And then you would talk about micro-segmentation of that, and then put some microservices which might be, proxying back to it. And then that way that protects that asset, and then get back into the network on whatever the network path is, understand what's trying to get to it, and see if that passes muster for you to be able to get to it. And then you kind of start from there, right? And I think there's obviously thoughts about, do you migrate or transform your current network, current legacy network into that? Or do you create a greenfield environment and slowly port over your systems and applications over there, right? The users and the access mechanism are not going to move, right? It's only your destination. That's where the micro-segmentation and perimeter starts to come into play, or the assets come into play, and then you move them into the greenfield environment. That's one approach. The other approach is, take that external facing stuff and then start to wrap things around it and then start to evaluate it. That's the second way of doing it. I mean, there's like multiple ways we can definitely have offline conversations, right? So.
Yeah, but I think the key is you've got to be honest with yourself as an organization in terms of what the risk of that asset is in the data, right? Because if you don't, you're just going to end up with a bunch of micro-segmentation that look just like your original perimeter.
Yeah,
right, with all these
controls. Don't duplicate the same problem.
That's where I know this term is thrown out quite a bit, but I don't think people actually take it seriously, which is identify your crown jewels.
Yep.
Do you know where the risks are? Yes, there's got to be a risk assessment methodology, but I know organizations are still struggling with just asset inventories. Now start there, do risk assessment, come up with what is most important, and that's always the best part where you want to start.
Thanks for watching. For more videos from the AT&T Business Summit, click subscribe.